There's a sound that echoes through history. It's not loud, it's not dramatic. It's the quiet click of a tape recorder, spinning in the dark, capturing words that were never meant to be heard. On the night of June 17, 1972, 5 men were arrested inside the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate office complex in Washington, D.C. They were wearing business suits and surgical gloves. They carried lockpicks, tear gas guns, and sophisticated bugging equipment. When police asked them what they were doing, they had no answer. At first, it seemed like a third-rate burglary, a bizarre footnote in American politics. But what unfolded over the next 2 years would shake the foundation of democracy itself, force a sitting president to resign in disgrace, and prove that even the most powerful man in the world isn't above the law. Richard Nixon was obsessed with control. By 1972, he'd spent decades clawing his way through American politics, surviving defeats that would have ended lesser careers. He'd lost the presidency to Kennedy in 1960 by the thinnest of margins. He'd lost the California governor's race in 1962 and told reporters, bitterly, that they wouldn't have Nixon to kick around anymore. But he came back. In 1968, he won the presidency by promising law and order in a country torn apart by Vietnam and civil rights protests. And in 1972, he was running for re-election. The polls showed he was going to win in a landslide. There was no rational reason to cheat, but rationality had left the building. Inside the White House, Nixon had created something unprecedented, a secret team of operatives called the Plumbers, because their job was to stop leaks of classified information. But they didn't just plug leaks. They spied on Nixon's political enemies. They broke into offices. They compiled lists of journalists, activists, and politicians to be audited, harassed, or destroyed. Nixon saw enemies everywhere. He kept an actual list. It was called the Enemies List, and it contained the names of hundreds of Americans whose only crime was disagreeing with the president. When those 5 men were caught at the Watergate, they weren't random burglars. They were part of Nixon's operation. One of them, James McCord, was the security coordinator for Nixon's re-election campaign. Another, E. Howard Hunt, was a former CIA operative working for the White House. They were there to bug the phones of the Democratic Party chairman, to photograph documents, to gather intelligence that could be used to sabotage the campaign of Nixon's opponent. The White House immediately denied any connection. Ron Ziegler, Nixon's press secretary, dismissed it as a third-rate burglary attempt. Nixon himself told the American people he had no knowledge of the break-in and that no one in his administration was involved. He was lying. But here's what makes Watergate fascinating. It wasn't the crime that destroyed Nixon, it was the cover-up. Because in the days and weeks after the break-in, Nixon and his inner circle made a choice. Instead of coming clean, instead of firing the people responsible and distancing themselves from the operation, they decided to bury it. They paid hush money to the burglars. They pressured the FBI to stop investigating. They destroyed evidence. They lied to Congress, to prosecutors, and to the American people. And they did it all from the White House, using the machinery of government to obstruct justice. For months, it worked. Nixon won re-election in November 1972, carrying 49 states in one of the most lopsided victories in American history. The Watergate story seemed to be fading. Most Americans had never heard of it, but 2 reporters at the Washington Post hadn't let go. Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein were young, hungry, and willing to follow the story wherever it led. They started with the burglars and worked backward, tracing the money, the connections, the lies. They had a source, someone deep inside the FBI feeding them information. They called him Deep Throat, and his identity would remain secret for more than 30 years. Deep Throat's advice was simple but profound. Follow the money. And when they did, the money led straight to the committee to re-elect the president, Nixon's campaign organization. The dam started to crack. In January 1973, the burglars went on trial. One of them, James McCord, decided he wasn't going to prison alone. He wrote a letter to the judge saying there had been perjury at the trial, that others were involved, that political pressure had been applied to keep people quiet. The letter was read in open court, and suddenly Watergate was front-page news again. The Senate launched an investigation. Televised hearings began in May 1973, and millions of Americans watched as witness after witness testified about the culture of corruption inside the Nixon White House. John Dean, Nixon's own White House counsel told the committee that Nixon had been directly involved in the cover-up, that there was a cancer growing on the presidency. Nixon denied everything. He went on television and told the nation he was not a crook. But the investigators kept digging, and in July 1973, they discovered something Nixon had hoped would never be found: the tapes. Nixon had secretly installed a voice-activated recording system in the Oval Office. Every conversation, every meeting, every phone call was being recorded. Nixon thought the tapes would be his insurance, his way of documenting history from his perspective. Instead, they became his death warrant. The special prosecutor subpoenaed the tapes. Nixon refused to hand them over, claiming executive privilege. The case went to the Supreme Court, and in a unanimous decision, the court ruled that not even the president is above the law. Nixon had to surrender the tapes. When prosecutors finally listened to them, they heard everything. They heard Nixon discussing how to pay off the burglars. They heard him ordering the CIA to block the FBI investigation. They heard him strategizing about how to contain the scandal, how to stonewall Congress, how to lie. One tape, recorded just 6 days after the break-in, was particularly damning. It became known as the smoking gun tape. When that tape was released in August 1974, Nixon's support collapsed overnight. Republicans who had defended him for 2 years turned against him. Articles of impeachment were moving through the House of Representatives. It was clear Nixon would be impeached, and almost certain he would be convicted in the Senate and removed from office. On August 8, 1974, Richard Nixon addressed the nation from the Oval Office. He didn't admit guilt. He didn't apologize. He simply said that he no longer had a strong enough political base in Congress to continue, and that he would resign the presidency effective the next day. It was the first and only time an American president has resigned. The next morning, Nixon left the White House, boarded a helicopter on the South Lawn, and flew away. Gerald Ford was sworn in as president. A month later, Ford granted Nixon a full pardon for any crimes he might have committed while in office. The pardon was controversial. Many Americans felt that Nixon should have faced trial, that justice demanded accountability. But Ford argued that the country needed to heal, that a prolonged prosecution would tear the nation apart. And so Nixon never went to prison. He never stood trial. He lived another 20 years, wrote books, gave speeches, slowly rehabilitating his image as an elder statesman. But Watergate changed everything. It shattered the trust between the American people and their government. More than 40 of Nixon's aides and associates were indicted. Many went to prison, including his attorney general, his chief of staff, and his closest advisors. It created a generation of skeptics who would never again take a president's word at face value. It gave us terms like cover-up and smoking gun and the suffix "gate" that we now attach to every scandal. Reforms were passed to limit presidential power, to protect whistleblowers, to ensure that what happened in the Nixon White House could never happen again. But here's the question that still haunts us more than 50 years later. Could it happen again? Because Watergate wasn't really about bugging an office or stealing documents. It was about a president who believed he was above the law, who surrounded himself with people willing to do anything to protect him, who used the power of his office to punish enemies and reward loyalty. Democracy is fragile. It depends on people choosing to follow the rules even when breaking them would be easier. It depends on institutions holding firm, on prosecutors willing to investigate, on judges willing to rule against power, on citizens willing to demand the truth. Watergate proved that the system can work, that even the president can be held accountable, but it also proved how close we came to losing everything. If not for a security guard noticing tape on a door lock, if not for 2 reporters who wouldn't let the story die, if not for a handful of people inside the government who chose conscience over career. The sound of history is often made in silence, a tape recorder spinning in the dark, a decision made in a closed room, a lie told with confidence. But the truth has a way of surfacing. It might take time, it might take courage, but it surfaces. And when it does, even the most powerful man in the world can be brought down by his own words, captured on tape, playing back the moment he chose power over principle, loyalty over law, victory over truth. The Watergate complex still stands in Washington, overlooking the Potomac River. It's been renovated into luxury condominiums. Tourists walk past it every day, many not knowing what happened there. or why it matters. But it does matter, because Watergate taught us that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, that democracy requires us to question, to challenge, to hold those in power accountable. And sometimes all it takes is someone brave enough to ask a simple question. What did the president know, and when did he know it? Subscribe to Eagle. Don't miss new content.